We're going to start now, move to welcoming a few of our superheroes up to our panel here. First of all, I'd very much like to welcome the wonderful Abdul Razak Shaukat, Professor Shaukat, who is the Principal Secretary for Science, Research and Innovation, the Government of Kenya. Please join us on stage. Thank you very much. Wherever you like, not the red one. Yeah. Next, I would like to invite, thank you, Bodo, Carly, who disobeyed the instructions of sitting where her name was, and, you know, she's a bit like that. That's okay. Come in, Carly, Development Agency. Thank you. Now, we were to have Pauline Basinga, who's the Director of Africa for Gates Foundation. I don't think... Paula! What are you doing hiding over there? Pauline, wonderful. Come in. Thank you, Pauline. Fantastic. Next, Amalate, to represent our Global Innovation Advisors. Welcome. Amma is the CEO of Impact Investing Ghana. Okay, and then Nivi Sharma. Nivi, please, if you'd like to come. She's the CEO of Bridges to Prosperity. Just had knee surgery, so can we give her an extra round of applause for coming with that? So that's got to be painful. And then finally, last but not least, the wonderful Nazri Adam, who heads up East Africa for the African Venture Philanthropy Alliance. Right. Okay, so I have some questions here. Now, it's not often that you have a keynote panel, but because we're an ecosystem, there's no hierarchy. We're all in one place together. Okay. So, Professor Shaukat, welcome. Thank you so much. You have a long history of driving innovation for government. And I want to start by just asking you to help us make sense of how this year has been for you, because we've heard a lot about the challenges, the disappearance of US aid, for example, overnight. It's been very disruptive in terms of the broader international community, but maybe there are opportunities in this for governments to take a stronger, self-sufficient approach. How are you interpreting the events of this year in terms of the leadership for innovation that you want to provide for Kenya?
Thank you very much, and many thanks for inviting me to come and share my thoughts with these very important colleagues here. I think for me, really, when I heard about the USAID pulling out, I was in Vienna that time as the director for Africa, and I said, this is probably somehow a blessing, because I've always been advocating for looking at what we have internally. You know very well that Africa is a very wealthy continent, so to speak, but we have for a long time been dependent from funders and donors and so on and so forth. And there's nothing wrong in that, but I think we've overdone it for many, many years to a level that we do not have an agenda for Africa in Africa by Africans. With all due respect, quite a number of things in the past have always been shaped somewhere else. So when this came, I said, look, there are ways and means of how we should be able to address this. And boom, His Excellency, the President, decided to create a new State Department in charge of science, research, and innovation. And boom, it's me who is going to come and lead this. Boom. So again, I think there are three things very quickly I just want to share. One, it's a wake-up call. We need to refocus and prioritize areas that we would also want to support, and issues of climate adaptation, issues of agri-tech, and so on and so forth. So this is one. Secondly is how we can also be able to think internally by strengthening the public-private partnership. We have private sector, in my opinion, 15 years ago, when I left 10 years ago, there was the LIWA, the linkage between the industry with academia. And I came back and everybody is still talking about how can we be able to operationalize all this. So again, the second point is how we can be able to look at the ecosystem and be able to fund it with the support, of course, from partners. So Tom, you're not getting away from this.
Boom.
We still need your support. And thirdly is to break the silos. Breaking the silos in the country and of course in sub-region and the bigger region as well by having more synergies, partnership and collaboration. Because the resources are really getting scarce, so to speak. So if we can be able to connect the dots and be able to work together, I think we will not be over-dependent in terms of support. Lastly, I just want to say that His Excellency has given us a marching order. If you followed his State of the Nation speech, he said that at the moment, and he's right, we are doing 0.8% of the GDP in science, research, and innovation in the country. He wants us to leapfrog to 1 towards 2% of the GDP. And to pick and quote his words, he said, this has got to be done. And I think that is where we want to do, by looking at the resources that we have, put on the table, and be able to look for our partners to match it so that we can be able to have prosperity together. Thank you.
Thank you. No, that is exciting to see how you're taking control of this agenda. But also, I mean, the reason IDEA exists is to help everyone with their own agendas. This is not just you helping us, but it's about us helping you. And so the more you can articulate the targets that have been set, the priorities, that's where we can be helpful in mobilizing this global world to help you. Carly, I'm coming to you, the other side, the development agencies. Now, you are one of 3 people who's been around since the very first meeting of IDEA, the other being, of course, the mother and the father. You're the baby. Okay, yeah. This is getting weirder. Now, you've seen a lot over the last 10 years in terms of the journey development agencies have been on around innovation. How are you making sense of this year? Is it another sort of expression of the same old up and down? Is there something more fundamental going on? And how are you personally and professionally with Grand Challenges Canada using this as an opportunity to take a new direction?
Yeah. I mean, it's a huge amount of things. I was trying to think about how do I summarize essentially what's happened over the last year. And I think a lot resonated about Bio's remarks this morning of really that idea of like this illusion of control is just not there anymore. And I've definitely drunk that Kool-Aid, and it's both liberating and also petrifying. I also have a 2-year-old at home, and I think that also helps with this idea that like, yeah, I have no control right now over like his desire just to say no to everything. And so it's a helpful reminder of like how you got to go with the flow all the time. Listen, Grand Challenges Canada, we were set up to because of some of the flaws that are in the traditional development approach. The Canadian government had the foresight 15 years ago to put us outside of government, give us some resources in order to change things like who's making decisions, what does the accountability look like, how are we thinking about value for money, and how do we make sure that we can actually have sustainable development. And I think those things have been like very much grappled with the whole time in IDIA, and I think in IDEA, and I think that I think that will continue despite what's going on in this context at the moment. But I am on the side of this is like a pretty fundamental shift that we're going through. I think just generally like the playbook seems to have shifted for everyone. That's in all countries. Some of that's really positive, where I think we just had an example of where it's really positive. I look at some of the countries like Canada where the conversation is a much more now inwardly looking and nationalistic, and the concept of a federal budget being tabled a couple of weeks ago that actually had the word like mercantilism in it, that I think like, this is wild. This is a different era we're in. So I have no answers, But I would say that some of the tensions that I'm really live to at the moment is this like urgency to act for communities that whose like support systems have just like fallen out. We're in this gap that even though that we've got some positives that can happen, that's a need that is there's many needs that are not being met. You're wearing your red thing today. It's World AIDS Day, and yet there's huge players that are just removing themselves from that. And then there's this overwhelm in the system, this paralysis of like so much change and information coming in and everyone trying to rearrange and scramble that that action is really slow to happen. I think a lot of people looking for a lot of others to lead away. And we don't yet seem to have like who is really leading that. But I do think that there's some positives coming out. I think the Accra reset is a really interesting light that's coming out in terms of how do you have a group of people who genuinely are accountable to the populations and to these issues that we have been collectively trying to address, saying, hey, like we're ready to lead, come follow us. Like, how do we make that happen? So that's one of them, the urgency to act in this kind of system paralysis. Another one I think is, and these are all kind of interconnected, but the kind of low and middle income country self-determination and this global north donor nationalism and that clash that's happening. I think on the plus of that, I'm seeing like the clarity from ministers of health around the world being like on what they would actually invest in when it comes to innovation being more than I've ever heard before. The lists are short. They're more pragmatic, although now I'm not using that word pragmatic, but about what they want to move forward and what they're actually willing to put their own resources on the table for. And I think that's a very powerful signal that we need to listen to. And there's these pressures of how can these solutions really benefit international trade coming from a lot of places such as Canada and others. So how do we think about that tension? And then the last one I'll just put out there is this scarcity of a scarcity mindset, essentially, where there's this lack of valuable like development and health work that's falling out. There's a lack of commodities, really simply, that literally are sitting places and not being delivered. But then at the same time, it's creating this openness to innovation and this like real spark to say, actually, we've got local solvers, we've got solutions that are maturing and have matured very quickly. And so how do we look at that? And let's be honest, like the loss of incumbents is a beautiful thing for innovators. When you actually have more space created in a market, then you can really move things forward. So I'm holding these. Would love to grapple with any of those as
it's the perfect place to do it, yeah. Interested in what you said about this transition period. There are positive things that are happening. We don't yet know how long this kind of period will be, and maybe we're on a constant phase of transition. So that's kind of our life, but it's interesting what you said about scarcity mindset. Innovation is born out of scarcity. Let's not forget that. So this is more than ever our time to work on that. Paulin, I want to bring you in. Now, you're a bit of an anomaly here because you're here representing the training alumni, but you're not actually one of our training alumni. The reason you're on this stage is because representing the Gates Foundation, you have been the core partner since helping to co-found IDIA for the last 7 years of the training. You helped us design it, you helped us deliver it. And I just actually want to put on the screen a quick testimony from someone from our June 2025 training this year who said, "This training was transformational. It didn't just teach me, it challenged my thinking and reshaped my entire approach to innovation. Thanks to IDEA, I now feel equipped with lifelong skills to advance successful, scalable, and impactful innovations, both in Ethiopia and wherever my work takes me next." Now, Paulin, Gates has obviously invested a lot into different forms of capacity, particularly early stage innovation, ideation, scientific research, and so on. I'm interested, you obviously the foundation have said they're going to conclude their operations in 20 years. How has this decision influenced the way you're thinking about the investments you're making in capacity building, particularly in terms of priority audiences where you think you can get the most impact from that 20-year investment? How is it affecting the way you're thinking about this?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tom. And apologies, seems like you didn't get my email confirming that I will be here. Oh. So
You're forgiven.
I was definitely following, and I was also here earlier, but it's always good to sit in the back and just feel the vibe. So really great to be here. The Gate Foundation, as you all know, you've heard from the news that Bill, in partnership with our CEO, Matt Suzman, and the board, have decided to close the foundation in the next 20 years, is actually to respond to something that the professor said. We fundamentally don't believe that in 20 years, we need to predict that Africa will need a philanthropy. There will be probably different set of issues in 20 years that people who will live during that time will be well equipped to try to solve those problems. So our role is actually to look back in the past 25 years of the Gate Foundation existence, which we are extremely proud of the partnership that we've had with you all, with government, with partners, and other donors as well. We've seen increased impact in terms of under-5 mortality reduction, maternal mortality reduction, smallholder farmer productivity increase, digital public infrastructure. There's a lot. But now, this decision was even made before the big change in terms of USG and other donor change, etc. So it's something that Bill has been thinking and consulting the board about, but also really to think about what is the next 20 years going to be? How do we accelerate the catalytic contribution of the foundation to development issues? And this is why you've seen the foundation the past 10 years. We've been really expanding our presence on the continent. We now have 5 offices in Africa: Ethiopia, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, and here in Kenya. And our plan for the next 20 years is actually to really strengthen our partnership with government, with local universities, local partners, to make sure that the multiple innovators that you have in this room are actually sitting in the Ministry of Health, in the technical working groups. They're sitting in the counties, in the districts, and they are actually able to, I think Dr. Bayo said it well, to become water into the challenging of implementation that we all know. Because every innovation that comes up, let me just take one. Let's say HPV vaccine, for example. As you know, this is the latest that the Gate Foundation and many other partners in the room contributed to. You know that to reduce the impact of cervical cancer, you have to give young women 2 doses of vaccine. So one of the things that the Gate Foundation supported was to actually prove that if you give only 1 dose, it has the same impact as 2 doses. That cut the cost of implementation, etc., by 50%, even the challenge of implementation by 50%. So being able to actually scale that, vaccines so that young girls actually get it, like Nigeria did 14 million, close to 14 million vaccines, it needs a lot of partnership at all levels, down to the villages. So you'll see more and more the Gate Foundation actually partnering at the country level with partners to really amplify those. And then the last thing I'll say is the fact that we have an end date has actually helped us to focus more and more. So we'll focus around 3 very important goals that innovation will cut across. Number 1 is really to help government continue to drive under-5 mortality and maternal mortality down. The second one is really to continue the work of disease elimination and eradication, like finishing the work on polio eradication, for example. We're very close. Imagine if one day no one has to spend any money in outbreak response for polio. That would be huge. And if down the road we can actually leave countries with very strong outbreak surveillance systems in place, that would be a huge legacy. This is like malaria. Every year the world will lose 600,000 kids and young adults for malaria. 90% of them are here. And we really need to actually think about what are the additional innovations that are needed. And this is where private philanthropy comes in to say, can we, put more money in finding new innovation to be able to control malaria? Tuberculosis, for example, continue to be the leading cause of mortality worldwide. This year the Gates Foundation is funding close to $800 million to finding the new vaccine for tuberculosis, for example. Those are places where, if we're able to do that, and we continue to do our advocacy globally to make sure that Canada, the UK, France, other people continue to fund organizations such as Gavi or the Global Fund, so that we can help countries. Prof says something critical. African governments are taking more control of their future, but they need support. For the past many years, we've been supporting them. The abrupt stop of funding is not the right way to go, right? It's actually to work with them, alongside them, and say, for the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to decrease our support as you actually, try to find ways to navigate the macroeconomic challenges. Many of our African governments are spending more in paying, debts, credit, etc., than they are investing in health and education. We know across Africa, with all our optimism, you can just watch the news. Many governments are struggling even to pay salaries. You talk to Minister of Finances, every 20, 21, 22 of every month, they are going back and calling the equivalent of KRA, how much money you've been able to do, looking at the salaries of soldiers, militaries, and teachers, etc. The money that remains to actually fund implementation program is very small. So that small, respectful boost is still needed. This is why we continue to actually ask for, ODA to continue. But, sorry. So I'll close by saying that the Gates Foundation will continue to be key on innovation. This is why IDIA's work in actually democratizing innovation introduction, the training you've been doing, etc. So I spent some time on the website to even, listen, some of the, testimony from people who have been, brought into those training, etc. It's fascinating because when you take someone from Tanzania or Ghana, etc., those are the people who go back in their homes. They're the ones that actually consult for ministries of health, agriculture, etc., to write those innovation introduction blueprints. And you've actually created all that knowledge that is in the website. Even when AI will be picking things from the web, they will pick this so that they can actually operationalize it. So thank you very much for your partnership, and we'll continue to work together.
No, thank you, Paula. And I think it's really interesting to hear what you're saying about Gates going deeper into the sort of ecosystem support. Going deeper into countries and spreading its support, doing the connections and the partnerships. And we're very excited to keep working with you in that because it aligns very well with our ecosystem approach, as you know here. Amma, one of the nice things about whenever I travel to a conference or an event is that basically Amma's face is always there. She's always like, oh, hi, Tom. So we've seen each other 3 times this year already, multiple different events. But you are a driving force in so many different ecosystems, not just Ghana, but around Africa. And you were one of our very first global innovation advisors to really help us think through strategy and so on. What have you been hearing this year that makes you think, oh, this is something IDEA should be aware of? This is an opportunity or a constraint? Or what would you want to prioritize based on the circles that you've been in this year?
Thank you, Tom. You're very, very kind, and it's always fun to bump into you. So what am I seeing? I think the elephant in the room is that there's much less money than there used to be, and so much more to do. And so when there's much less money, then you need to, that's where innovation really comes in. How do we take, this room and the universe that we represent controls just a very small slice of the resources on this earth. And we've been talking since 2015, when IDEA was born, about unlocking private sector financing. But it's been a lot of talk. It really hasn't happened at scale. And part of what we need to do now in a time of crisis is have more honest conversations about the things we failed at and begin to explore the places where some of that is working and why, and begin to form the kinds of partnerships that can really help us unlock funding that isn't in the room. which means that the private sector needs to be in the room at places like this. But the hard thing is that, so at Impact Investing Ghana, we bring unusual people together. We'll bring researchers and business people. And the language is different. The motivations are different. So it's very hard to have meaningful conversations where everybody feels like this was a good use of my time. And that calls for a skill that I call translation. Being able to deeply understand what one community really wants and their constraints, because we all have them, their barriers, and translating that in a way that you can create a conversation that's useful. And I would say that's one of the biggest things that IDEA could do, could step in a little deeper. This is a great community, but they are still missing people. And yet just plopping them into our already designed agenda that fits very well for this community won't work. So that's what I would say, radical ideas for financing innovation. The other thing that I've noticed, and I think Pauline spoke to it, it's about the global financial architecture. It's very easy to pretend that, the money in Africa, the debt that is being paid, that it's priced right. Everyone knows that it isn't priced right, and that sovereign debt should not be priced the same way that you would price an individual's debt, because countries are institutions that endure. Even if they go through a time of crisis, even if they have a coup d'etat, they come back. And yet, debt in Africa is priced in a way that if the rest of the world had to borrow at that rate, they would not be able to deliver essential services. And so maybe this is a time where we begin to say, instead of doing the cute, innovative things, we need to be bold enough to attack the structures, the systems that keep these inequalities in place at scale. Because as African governments lean in to fund domestically, they are going to need that fiscal space. And we know what is crowding it out. So that's the second thing. And I don't know how IDEA contributes to that, because there's a lot, systems are hard to dismantle or recreate, but we've seen systems destroyed by executive orders. So it's possible. We just need to orchestrate the perfect storm to make it happen. It is possible. Then I would say solutions, systems are also very national in scope, and we've been working very much in Ghana. But it's been really interesting. 3 years ago, we formed the Africa Impact Investing Group and began to collaborate a lot deeper with sister country organizations in Nigeria and South Africa and across Africa. And it's been just amazing to see how deep national knowledge combined with learning and experience sharing from other countries can lead to solutions, scaling, those words that we're supposed to stop using because there's fire, but scaling more rapidly than you could do just in your country. And so I would say, let's look at working more at a national level, like the work that was done in Vietnam. But work like that needs to be led locally. And organizations like IDEA come along as thoughtful askers of questions that accelerates the process. And so we need to see that strengthening of countries. I'll pause there and hope that
Emma, so good. Thank you so much. A couple of things I'll pick up on. The translation and the curation function that you're talking about, particularly between our different communities, so important. We've positioned ourselves to try and do that from the very beginning. I think we can get better at it, especially as our communities evolve themselves as well. So that's one point. The next point about transforming the innovation architecture for financing. Tomorrow we have a collaboration lab that is focused specifically on that topic. We're doing some really interesting things on how can we connect up the different sources of capital that we have in the room, that at the moment they're just siloed and fragmented. How do we make the lives easier for innovators to get to scale more smoothly? But how also, to your second point, do we make this a country-led process? And how is there an IDEA model for supporting country-level collaboration like this? That's going to be the focus of another collaboration lab tomorrow. So get these ideas in, and thank you for raising them.
Tom, I'm just going to say this really quickly on the point of letting go of control. You know, Google had this, or it's supposed to have this thing where 20% of your time can be spent on something that's not your job. And to the funders in the room, I would say explore putting 20% of your funding in something you don't control, that isn't connected to a log frame, that maybe allows other people that are not you, that are not you to make decisions and see, because innovation and control don't quite go together.
Okay, if I see people running away from you at coffee, I think we know why, but I like it. Good. Okay, Nasri, we've talked about the role of the private sector. Now, obviously, you are sitting across the African Venture Philanthropy Alliance. You had your annual conference just, was it 3 weeks ago? I think it feels like 6 months. Congratulations, it was a fascinating place, bringing together so many domestic innovators and investors. I'm really interested, some of the things I kept hearing at that conference. Africa cannot ODA its way to prosperity. Africa is home to $1 trillion in domestic assets that dramatically outsize ODA. 10 of the 15 fastest growing economies are in Africa. So what's the challenge here? How do we unlock these resources? And when you think about the partnership that we launched between AVPA and IDA, what are the things that attracted you to working together here? What do you think is exciting you about the road ahead?
So thank you so much for having us join today. And I think I'll start with the second question. I met Tom. And we had a great conversation. And at the end of the conversation, we realized that we were trying to achieve exactly the same things, just using different language as we were describing it. And we recognized, imagine if, I think we ended the chat with, imagine if we were to do something together. Just imagine. And imagine if we didn't want to take credit for the outcome. Just imagine. And it was in that moment that I said, this is actually an organization that we feel so much alignment. And I think the word we used was value alignment. So if we are aligned in terms of the value, understanding that the landscape is going to shift, and understand that the nuances that will be in play will be different. This year was different. I'm pretty sure next year is going to be different too. But having the right partners to sound off on and be critical friends to each other, I think that was what it was, because sometimes this work of ecosystem building, it can be lonely. It's not as sexy, I guess, because it's not something that gets results today. It's a long game. It's something that you're not quite too sure when exactly certain things are going to happen, but it's important work, and you trudge on, and you want to get there forward. And I'll use an analogy because now I'm in my Wakanda moment. And when we were thinking through our own strategy as AVPA, it was thinking, like the Maasai warrior visual, hunting down the lion and kind of pacing it and walking through the savannah and following it through. And at the end of it, a couple of team members said, oh, yeah, so we're those warriors, we're those guys who are going to get that lion, and, we're really tactical about how we're going to do it. And we have our spears and the rest of it. And I remember asking, who told you you're the warriors? Maybe you're the prey, yeah? And I think that's how we started to rethink our role as an organization and who we need to have in our back, in our front, to our sides, to really amplify the work, because the problem that we're trying to solve for, as you've just given out those statistics, is too big a problem for one organization, one ecosystem builder, one development agency, one government, to be able to even start to scratch the surface of, as Amma has said. It's too grand to scale. So it was in that thinking about, then what can we do that's tangible? That's not just a tick box exercise, because at the end of it, I think also some of the more critical voices to the work that we do say, you guys, you're just you bring people together and that's it, right? But there is a power in bringing people together, as you just felt this morning as Dr. Bayo took us through that. There is, as Paulina said, the water. And someone has to do it. It's a bit of that kind of a sense. And who else would I want to do it if not with you, Tom, and the fantastic team at IDIA? So I hope that, is why we wanted to really partner with IDIA. And in terms of what came out of our recent convening, the whole "we cannot grant ourselves to prosperity" was one of the real big ones for me. And thinking through with the statistics that come out about, Africa, the youth population, it's so big, it's going to do this, it's going to do that. But how do they feel? How are they actually? Do they see their space in the same way that we are seeing those statistics? And that sort of querying and challenging and checking ourselves and others, such as the private sector players that we were able to bring in, the pension funds we were able to bring in, because as Amma said, these words, unlock, scale, and that's all sometimes that what people want to hear. But at the end of the day, you need to connect at a human level. We're trying to do this work because hopefully, at some point in all of our careers, we wanted to do meaningful work. We wanted to change our spaces. We wanted to be able to be agents of something that we would be happy to have our names attached to as a collective. And that's the work of ecosystem building. And weaving and connecting is very important. Another thing also that I think we have really thought through and will continue to think through and work on is, if I could use that terminology, is Google Translate for the ecosystem. So we've talked about lexicon and how language is a huge barrier to a lot of the work that we do as different organizations and different entities. And so we're trying to sit in the middle of all of that and coordinate messaging in a way that is simple, adaptable, flexible, but still succinct enough to get us to the outcome and to the end goal that we want to have. So we really want to be able to achieve our mission, which is very, very simple. How can more capital flow towards social impact on the continent? How are we getting more catalytic capital to the table? How are we hopefully influencing those with capital to be catalytic in the way that they're seeing their role, such as what Ford is now, Gates is trying to do, and Ford and others, and Rockefeller as well, under the C3 consortium of catalytic capital. How are we able to also inform through research? How are we able to use data? I know AI is a bit of a dirty word sometimes, but how are we able to use technology in its fullness, innovation in its fullness? And lastly, how do we hold space for the unknown? So just listening through to everybody saying, well, I don't know the answer, and I'm not sure, and it's fine to not know and to be unsure. But the point of it is to continue to try and to explore. And I think that's fundamentally where we sit in this conversation.
Thank you, Nazri. I want to pick up on a few things because I think it leads us really nicely to our last panelist, Nivi, around this idea of connections, building bridges. See what I did there? Right. So Nivi is CEO of Building Bridges for Prosperity. And you have had a really interesting journey to scale, where at the beginning it was very much about concretely building bridges to connect communities. And then you were like, if we're going to do this for everyone who needs connections, we need to be about the same size as the World Bank. And that's not going to happen. So you made a sort of fundamental shift in your scaling strategy from building bridges to getting bridges built, which brings in the influencing aspect. And I'm really interested to hear a bit more about that, because this is very important for IDEA. We are not an implementing agency. We have members who do a lot of that, but our goal is to really influence to get to scale. So I'm interested, what were the challenges you faced when you made that pivot in your scaling model? And what advice would you have for IDEA as we sort of undertake the same thing?
Thank you. And thank you for butchering our name, Building Bridges for Prosperity. And I say thank you because I've made the decision to change the organization's name to FICA, which means to reach. So not only, so every time I hear it said wrong or spelt wrong, the number of times I've read Brides to Prosperity, I'm further validated that that was right. So yeah, an organization that started building one bridge at a time, and seeing, immediate, palpable impact on education, healthcare, economic empowerment, farmer incomes, gender balance, and saying, yes, we're boiling the ocean now. If we're going to build one bridge at a time, and if we're going to grow, let alone even scale, building these bridges, the uncomfortable truth is we'd have to be humongous. That's not a strategic way to go about it. And so that's when a strategy began for 5 years of, we're going to invest in evidence. So we did the largest scale randomized control trial on infrastructure, which is ridiculously and operationally hard, but did a randomized control trial to say, here is the undeniable, irrefutable proof that infrastructure, rural infrastructure, is a very powerful development intervention. It touches almost every aspect of poverty and development, but dollar for dollar, it is a really good place to put money in. And that's something that we were keen for governments to know that number, that ROI, only in economic terms, because I think we do some funny maths when we start putting dollars against the price of a child not dying on their way to school or the price of an education. So even just, economically, dollar for dollar, what does this low-cost, climate-smart infrastructure do compared to other, expensive, shiny urban projects that we like to do in infrastructure? The second part of it was, how do we scream and shout about that from the rooftops? The advocacy, the influence. How do we take that evidence and right from local government decision-making level to national levels to wherever those global development agendas are, how do we start influencing those spaces and getting them to think about this forgotten development intervention, which is rural infrastructure? And so, to me, that feels a lot like a black box. That we're getting private sector to think about it. We're getting local governments are keen, national governments are keen, but they don't quite have the standards or the manuals on how to maintain and regulate this kind of infrastructure. And I think when we think about the next SDGs that will be written in 2030, to make sure that rural infrastructure is not forgotten is a big and challenging problem to see how do we influence that. And then the third part of our strategy was, if you're willing, if you've seen the evidence and you've been influenced, then how do we make sure that you're able to do this independently? And so a big part of our scale is thinking from the onset of our exit, that when we join a country, when we start that government partnership, how do we make sure that in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 20 years from now, we're able to exit, that we're able to look at public sector and say, what are your standards, what are your manuals, what are your technical capabilities to regulate like? Let's look at your private sector. Are you able to build safe, reliable, climate-smart infrastructure? And we even look at the talent, which is TVETs, universities, technical training schools, that are there people who know how to be the doer at scale in Mulago speak. And as we think through that model, it's an interesting challenge we run into, because that's where the innovation kind of meets the rubber meets the road. In that, yes, we've got this satellite images that we have combined with AI and deep elevation models to help you as a government prioritize your investments, but that's not how governments make their decisions. It's not another white paper. It's not another piece of research that influences, as much as we want to flex our technical tools, as much as we want to flex our innovation in this space, the average government office that I've walked into has a pile this high of good ideas. It would be mayhem if they changed their priorities and policies every time another NGO released a white paper or a nice piece of research. That's not the reality on the ground. So I think that's a really important lesson that we've learned is we've got to align and file in with government priorities and policies. There was once in 2023, the Rwanda had some horrible floods, and a lot of bridges were washed away, not ours, but in general. And my country director and head of engineering called, and they're like, "Oh my God, we got a call last night from the head of the Transport Development Authority, and we're going to have to deploy and fix this problem, and it's not ours." And I thought, what a great sign! What a great sign that when a government's at its most vulnerable point, if they're calling us, then that is a sign of what we're trying to do here in that systems change space. So yeah, those are some of the highlights and challenges.
That is a really nice way to end this, because I think what you're talking about there is trust. Trust and connections. And I think what everybody on this panel has talked about is the importance of working together on this, having the right stakeholders at the right time, being able to understand each other, align our incentives, leverage our resources, and build movements for change. And I really liked what you were saying about screaming and shouting from the rooftops, because sometimes, let's face it, this is hard. We work on issues that in other parts of the world, there are governments actively deprioritizing them. The US has decided from today it will not mark World AIDS Day. So we have our work ahead of us. And I think what is really exciting is the energy and the commitment, the drive, the calabrium that I'm feeling is pulsing on this panel to do this together. And that's exactly setting the stage for the next couple of days going forward. So this has been a teaser of the kind of conversations that you're going to have. I want to thank, and please join me in please thanking our panel, whetting our appetite for the next little bit.